The Last Starfighter. This 80s movie about a kid who was whisked away on an intergalactic adventure due to his hot video game skills broke new ground by being one of the first movies to use computers, instead of miniatures, to represent real-world objects. The story is fun, and the effects are, for the time, really impressive. But after watching it again recently, I was fascinated by a second plotline I never noticed before. The one where an indie game developer with a dream hitches a space DeLorean to the star that is the early 80s video game craze. And just how poorly that likely turned out for him. Our hero Alex Rogan is visited by the alien Centauri after Alex beats the high score on a coin-op spaceflight game called Starfighter. Centauri tells Alex that he invented Starfighter, and that the plot of the game, defend the frontier against Zura and the Kodan Armada, is all real. Starfighter is a test Centauri designed to find new pilots to join the Star League, the military organization that defends said frontier. Starfighter wasn't your average arcade game. Not only were its graphics literally light years better than any other game at the time, it had some very special hardware. It contacted Centauri whenever someone beat the high score, and it could remove the disguises of alien assassins if they stepped too close. When Alex declines being drafted by the Star League to fight Zor, Star League wants the money back they gave Centauri to make Starfighter. Centauri then regales them with the difficulties of video game publishing on Earth, especially for the home market. So, Centauri was running his own indie game company, making coin-op games like the one Alex played, as well as gearing up for a console release, and his investors were starting to get antsy. If we look back at the history of the video game industry in the US between mid-1983, when the movie was shot, and mid-1984, when it was released, we can get an idea how this business venture likely turned out for this particular extraterrestrial. Wink. Centauri tells Alex that the Starfighter machine at the trailer park was supposed to be delivered to Vegas. Most likely, Centauri worked with at least one US-based coin-op arcade distribution company to sell and install the games. In the early 80s, arcades bought coin-op games either directly from the manufacturer or through a distributor. For example, Nintendo games like Donkey Kong would be built and imported from Japan, or later built in the US, and then distributors would buy those games, then sell and ship them around the US. As an arcade operator, you either bought the game outright, or applied for a payment plan from the manufacturer or distributor. So let's say Otis, the general store owner at the trailer park, wanted to install a game for the kids there to play. He'd contact the local distributor and ask for something popular, and, through a twist of fate, get sent Starfighter instead of, say, Frogger or Ms. Pac-Man. Doesn't really matter as long as the kids like it, right? He'd likely get out a payment plan, and the quarters from the machine would help pay off the loan. When Alex decided he didn't want to become a Starfighter, Star League Command demanded Centauri return the money they gave him, to which Centauri replied that it takes a long time to invent the games, merchandise them, and get them in homes by Christmas. If Centauri wants consoles in stores by Christmas, he'd have a booth at the July 1983 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Buyers from large retail chains like Sears or JCPenney would check out the computer and video game systems on display and place orders to have them available for the holidays. Centauri would have demo units of Starfighter out for buyers to try. He'd be at a disadvantage. This isn't an Atari, Coleco, or Intellivision game. While you can get pretty creative with what cartridges can do, there's no easy way to bypass the primitive in comparison console video hardware in order to handle Starfighter's graphics, not to mention the phone home and face melter parts. Starfighter has to be its own console. But Starfighter is visually impressive. I bet some buyers would be swayed, especially, and this date is super important, in this summer of 1983. See, The Last Starfighter, the movie, not our hero, had a timing problem. The movie was shot in mid-1983 when an oversaturation of arcades was in full swing. There were too many arcades splitting up the small base of hardcore gamers, and few of these arcades could be profitable. This arcade bubble, like all economic bubbles, started popping. Arcade operators couldn't make payments on their machines to distributors, and distributors couldn't pay manufacturers. By the time the movie arrived in theaters in mid-1984, companies like Atari were in serious financial trouble and were selling off parts of their company just to stay afloat. With arcades failing and a public souring on arcade games, getting future copies of Starfighter, the coin-op game, into circulation would get a lot harder. But that's nothing compared to what would happen to Starfighter, the home console. Quickly produced games overloaded stores with junk merchandise that they just couldn't sell. This was when Atari famously bulldozed tens of thousands of copies of the ill-fated ET cartridge into a landfill, then covered them all with cement. Video game was a bad word in retail. It took eliminating all video game related language from the ahem entertainment system, implementing hardware controls to ensure game quality, and then contacting New York City stores one by one for the console to get any traction in the US by the time it became the NES in 1985. Even if you hand wave away all the alien technology, the realities of the early 80s arcade and video game industry would make recruitment of new starfighters on Earth quite a challenge for Centauri. Would he repossess arcade machines after their owners couldn't pay their bills, knowing it would cut into recruitment efforts? Would he fight with corporate buyers about how Starfighter, unlike those other games, will draw massive crowds to stores come December 1st? You know what? I don't want to know. The movie is a fun slice of what the culture around video games in the 80s felt like, where just getting good at a game was not enough to whisk you away from your boring life. And I bet there are others out there on Earth with that same spark. Now that the Starfighter program needs rebuilding after the events of the movie, well, if Centauri Video Games Incorporated can survive Zero and the Kodan Armada, I'm sure it can survive a little video game bubble popping.